The things that have happened to our children are things that shouldn't happen to children at all, and really have changed their development and the way that they think about the world.
That discomfort, that fear that I had just imprinted on my soul.
We've gone through more things than most adults have, or can even understand where we're coming from.
The neglect, the abuse.
You don't know what it's like to be ripped away from your family or from your siblings.
I felt little trust. I felt little love.
Trauma is like no other experience because it's not something we understand or can make sense out of.
You are just responding from one moment to the next because it's literally, your safety depends on it.
Trauma never goes away. It is a developmental process. It is a journey of healing.
One of the great gifts of our species is that we are adaptable. The fact that the brain's so capable of adapting and responding to the world.
It's not going to happen overnight. It doesn't happen through words, it happens through actions, and it happens through repetition of positive experiences in a family.
This is Core Team, right time training for resource parents. In this episode, we focus on the impact of stress and trauma on a child's developing brain. We'll hear from experts on brain development.
This interesting sequence of development is also the sequence by which the brain processes experience.
We'll learn from veteran resource parents about the reality of parenting children who have been hurt.
He thought by me putting my hand on him that I was getting ready to let him have it.
And we'll listen to the voices of youth.
I was very lost and confused for a long time.
As we explore ways to help young people heal from trauma.
So many people that hear the word trauma think that trauma is related to something we see in the news or on a headline, or that it has to be violent. And what we know about trauma is that it is occurring every single day in the lives of people that are sitting next to us at school and are standing in line with us at the bank. It is this chronic exposure to things like separation and loss, poverty, homelessness, abuse, neglect. It goes on and on and on.
Trauma can be a single event or a pattern of experiences.
One of the most useful ways to think about trauma is the 3E formulation. And the 3 E's are the traumatic event, like a fire or watching domestic violence or being physically assaulted, for example. The second E is the experience that the person has when they're in the midst of that event. And the third E is the effects. What are the long-term effects of having been in that event and having had the experience of fear or terror while you're in that event? And if you look at the histories of the kids you work with, one of the things that's really helpful is to think about what are the potential events in their life that may have caused an experience of fear, intense fear, that now has some long-term effects in the way they think, feel, and behave.
I think that's really how I think about trauma, is something that changes how your child feels in the world. Our kids often feel unsafe in a situation that makes me feel fine, like a birthday party. That sounds fun, but our kids find that really scary because they don't know what will happen there or who might be there. And so trauma really changes how kids behave and interact with the world around them.
To understand the long-term impact of trauma, it's helpful to understand the basics of the stress response and the difference between short-term or acute stress and chronic stress.
Probably the most common experience that everybody has had related to acute stress is the experience of almost getting into a car accident. Almost rear-ending the car in front of you, right? So when that happens, our body responds. I get sweaty, I get shaky, my heart starts racing. Then, as we drive, we hope that we get to a place of safety. So that acute stress response that has come up so high can then come back down. That is a normal response. So our central nervous system is really made to respond to stress in the short term.
But many of the children in care have lived with long-term chronic stress.
Post-traumatic stress is the same exact thing as acute stress. The difference is that there's no safety at the end of the road. So you are in a prolonged and exaggerated state of stress. And what happens after your body is in that acute stress phase for a prolonged and exaggerated time is it creates a lot of changes in your brain, and thus impacts a lot of things in your body. It impacts the way you think about things, it impacts the way you see yourself, the way you see others, the way you behave, the way you are able to or not able to manage your emotions.
Most of us are at baseline pretty well regulated. And when we have a moderate challenge, we have a moderate internal response. But the kids that we work with frequently have what we call a sensitized stress response. And what that means is they're overly reactive. So if they have a minor challenge, they'll have an overreaction.
It takes just a tiny trigger, especially when they're stressed about other things or feeling insecure in the family. It goes straight to, like you miss a math problem and nobody's mad at you, it's not a big deal, but they miss a math problem, their brain goes straight to, I'm stupid, I'm bad, nobody loves me, I shouldn't be part of this family, I wish I were dead. Like in seconds.
My kids used to have really big tantrums, like 4, 5, 6 hours long, pulling on their hair, trying to knock their teeth out, banging their heads, that kind of stuff.
On one visit, she knocked over a glass of juice and had a huge meltdown. I mean, it was, wow, huge.
The origins of an overly sensitized stress response can be traced to the brain and the things that happened during brain development.
If you look at this simple model of the brain, part of what we're trying to illustrate with this image is that the brain's organized in a hierarchical fashion, from the lowest and simplest parts all the way up to the highest and most complex parts of the brain.
Beginning in utero, the brain develops from the bottom up.
And this top part of the brain, everybody's probably heard of the term cortex. And that part of the brain is involved in planning and speech and language and knowing right from wrong. And then when you go way down to the bottom part of the brain, this is the part of the brain that's involved in regulating heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, very simple functions. And as you go into the middle parts of the brain, you start to get more regulatory functions.
How I like to explain it is that it's responsible for 3 main functions. It's responsible for sensation, it's responsible for memory, and it's responsible for affect regulation. Let's go to affect regulation for a second. So think about what makes an infant kind of stressed or dysregulated. Typically, it's something related to a sensation that's not being attended to, okay? So if you think about this infant who is hungry, that's a bit of having no control over a situation. So much like when we almost rear-end the car in front of us, when there's a disruption in sensation for an infant, that creates changes in their ability to regulate themselves. So what do? They cry, they squirm, their muscles tense, they breathe heavy. How many times during the course of a week do we hope that a parent or a caregiver responds to the disrupted sensations of an infant? We hope that it's constant, right? So there's a disruption in sensation, it clicks on the brainstem to be activated, on alert. Something's wrong, I need to protect myself. My regulation is not working well. But if somebody helps, that creates a memory. But what has to happen is that this has to happen over and over and over again. So a disruption, a dysregulation, and then somebody comes and kind of puts my sensations back to where they feel good. So how do we respond to an infant? Do we hold an infant and say, hey dude, get it together, right? No, we respond to their sensation. We respond to food, dry diapers, holding, cuddling, rocking, those sensations of touch. All of those things that we say are targeting sensations are really helping to calm down the brainstem. As this happens over and over and over and over again, sometimes seemingly thousands of times in the course of a week, we're creating memories. We're creating a deep neuronal pathway.
Over time, the child learns to deal with stress.
So if you have healthy relational experiences, lots of learning opportunities, you are in an environment where you're loved and you get attention and you have opportunities to explore the world in a healthy way, those systems develop pretty normally and they help the brain and body work in this smooth and integrated way. But we know that there are three things that will predictably alter the development of those systems and cause problems in every part of the brain that they connect with and in the body. And those three things are some form of intrauterine insult, like prenatal alcohol, prenatal meth, prenatal distress for the mother. The second thing is disruptions in bonding and attachment in the first years of life. And the third thing is traumatic experiences. And so when you think about the child that you live with, many of those children have had all three of those things. They've had some form of intrauterine insult. They've had bonding disruptions when they were young. And then they've been exposed to all kinds of events that are potentially traumatic. And so it's no surprise then that they have a cascade of problems from the top part of their brain all the way down to the bottom part of their brain.
As we've seen, the brain develops from the bottom to the top. This sequence of development is the same process by which the brain processes experience.
The fact that the brain processes experience sequentially means that the first part of the brain that gets dibs on processing information is the lowest and dumbest part of your brain.
We call it our lizard brain. It's part of the brain that you have in common with the lizards. It's the thing that keeps you alive, but it sometimes runs you into walls.
So lizards are not very future-oriented. They don't think about the consequences of their behavior. They literally think about the moment. And so the more threatened you are, the more you're using these more primitive parts of your brain for problem solving and for behaving and so forth.
You are just responding from one moment to the next because it's literally, your safety depends on it.
Because our teens' brains are wired for fear, they're always going to be down in the part of the brain that's called the midbrain. This is the part of the brain where life happens in the next 15 seconds. There is no next week.
When kids have had trauma, it affects them all the way down to their core. And so I've had kids sit in my office and talk about feeling like their brain is spinning inside their head, which is basically, I can't hold my brain inside my head, and I feel this way a lot. And so, no, I'm not listening to you talk about math. And at home, I didn't hear you tell me to do my chores. And so when you can think about how that would feel, it really makes you think about how you need to step back and figure out how to make the head stop spinning before the child can really engage in the rest of the world.
The simplest way to think about this is that in order for you to connect with your child and communicate something to the top part of the brain, first of all, the lower part of the brain has to be regulated. And if it's regulated enough, then you can connect, you can relate, and that's sort of the middle part of the brain. And if you've been able to be regulated and connect, then you can reason with your child. Your child will hear you. They'll hear what you're saying. In reality, this sequence of engagement is about communication. It's about, how am I going to effectively get what's in my cortex? How does it get from this top part of my brain, through the middle part of my brain, out my mouth, into their lower part of their brain, through the middle part of their brain to the top part of their brain. That process has lots of little landmines that can blow it up, as you well know if you have parented a child who's experienced developmental trauma.
Over time, caregivers can begin to predict what may trigger these landmines.
A trigger is anything that causes that child to be like thinking that something isn't quite right. I smell something I don't like, I see something I don't like, I hear something I don't like.
It could be ketchup, it could be a sound, it could be a smell to throw them off, and you don't know why they're acting that way. There's something in their past that was traumatic, and they heard it or saw it, and they're gone. They off the hook.
When they hear a siren, when they smell smoke, when they smell the smell of alcohol on somebody's breath, when they see a certain tattoo on a certain part of a body, all of those things can be triggers.
Maybe even coming to dinner is a trigger, because maybe in their family of origin, the dinners were completely chaotic. Maybe that's when dad came in or mom came in, and that's when the violence began, was at dinner.
We were at McDonald's in the play area, and an ambulance went by, and he kind of had a panic attack. And it took me a while to realize why he was kind of shut down. And I had to stop, and I had to think of, okay, what has just happened in the last, couple minutes that made him this way? I was like, we were sitting here, and that boy yelled, that one hit that one, an ambulance went by. I was like, oh. I was like, okay, buddy. I was like, are you sad because you're thinking about what happened with your mom?
One time, the little boy I had, he had been physically beaten. I went to put my hands on him, and he drugged me all over my kitchen. It was horrible. Yeah, he did, because he thought by me putting my hand on him that I was getting ready to let him have it. And I guess he decided, I'm going to let her have it before she lets me. And I had to keep telling him over and over again, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm not trying to hurt you. Just trying to talk to you.
In situations of real or perceived danger, the cortex shuts down and the primitive brain takes over.
It's interpreting the present based upon a whole set of memories and associations that were created in that child's past. And if the past was characterized by unpredictability, by threat, by chaos, what's going to happen is, if the present has any sensory cue or any quality that's reminiscent of that past, the child is going to act in the present as if they're being hurt in the past.
So it could be completely unrelated to the here and now, but the trigger is connected to a memory.
And their brain will act as if they're under threat and shut down their cortex, and they won't think about the consequences of their behavior. They'll just behave. And the behavior will be primitive and aggressive. And so they'll hit the kid who bumped into them in the hallway. And then the teacher will go, "What were you thinking?" And the reality is, he wasn't thinking. He was reacting.
I don't know. I don't know why I just punched her in the face. I don't know why I just flipped over that desk. She looked at me and I thought this, or he tapped my shoulder, and all this, it just like this. And it's because our body is responding, not our thinking brain.
And realizing that some of that behavior, particularly behavior that's very disrespectful, defiant, scary, aggressive, unsafe, realizing that that behavior flows from the impact of trauma is crucial.
A lot of times your teenagers are not teenagers. A lot of times you'll get those 13, 14, 15-year-olds that have that behavior of a 7 or 8-year-old.
In trauma, we throw away the chronological age completely. You want to look at every child from where they are developmentally.
It's hard with our teenagers because we're like, well, they're too old for that. No, they're not. Developmentally, emotionally, and socially, they're much further behind.
The adult world kind of puts high value on reasoning, on cortical stuff. And so when we see a child who's not paying attention, we say things like, pay attention. Or we see people that are getting all stirred up and we say things like, calm down. That's not effective. And so words have limitations.
You can't scream at them to calm down because they're going to be like, no.
So you can't just tell somebody to calm down and expect them to calm down. It doesn't work.
Really, a child's not able to connect with you at that time. Or it needs to be more nonverbal connection at that time. When a child is dysregulated, they need to feel you, they need to see you.
You have to think of some other kind of relational communication to help somebody calm down. Some other regulatory activity that you can recruit to help the regulatory part of them calm down. Like, let's go for a walk.
So let's go for a walk together. And what that does is the child gets regulated, you get to be a human being who demonstrates to them what it looks like to say, I'm not okay right now, this is what I need to do. And it makes not being okay, okay. And it also provides, it's like the whole thing can be a lesson.
This is where you have to learn how to be present, but you need to be present, and instead of being face to face, be parallel.
It's almost similar to like the parallel play, but it's parallel doing something. It's non-invasive. You're not even really looking at the kid, because some of these kids are not particularly fond of face-to-face or eye contact. But it's the close proximity, kind of like feeling out another person.
Just, chill with them for a minute, do what they do. Just spend time with, just walk in on their life for a minute and just chill with them. Don't sit there like you want to do an interview with them, but just sit there and chill with them and see what they're interested in and see what they're talking about or what's hot in the street.
So even like breaking eye contact to color and then just chatting about what's on TV, that can be much less confrontational and frightening than like, so tell me everything that you've ever experienced, because they're not going to do that. So
basically just, step in their lives and just, take a peek.
We always say where I work that if the kid can't find peace, you have to be it. You have to bring that peace. If they can't find calm, you have to be it.
If you're in parallel, you're regulated, what's going to happen is they're going to get regulating stuff, they're going to be relationally with you, and they're going to quiet down. Regulate, relate, and then reason.